So we move from warm words and sentiment to reality.
My Lords, the House is rightly proud of the work of its select committees, and it's a matter of profound regret when its reports are not debated, as my noble friend Lord Hannay said earlier on, in a timely manner, and the usual channels should address this. It's a privilege to serve on the International Relations and Defence Select Committee, and I too pay tribute to the chairmanship of the noble Baroness, Lady Annelly, who chairs it in an admirable way and keeps us all on our toes at every meeting. I refer, my Lords, to my interests as co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Eritrea, as an officer of various other APPGs, and as a patron of the Coalition for Genocide Response. At paragraph 82 of this report, the committee expressed its disappointment at the government's approach to Africa, describing it as confused and confusing. It is not a strategy, we said, but rather some broad ideas and themes with little clarity on how the government plans to put it into action. In urging the government to take a deeper interest in Africa, the report points out that prime ministers rarely visit Africa. And as African ministers come and go, as the noble Lord Grocott said to us earlier on, Baroness Amos told us there's always a new plan, and here we go again. Contrast this, my Lords, with the approach of China. We need to be much more aware of the strategic nature of Belt and Road indebtedness, the plundering of resources, and the quid pro quo demand for African votes at the United Nations. We also, though, need to learn from and harness the diaspora. And, as we've been hearing, remittances have a greater value than development aid. That isn't to say that we shouldn't restore the cuts in development aid, but we must recognise the role that remittances can play. For example, in 2019, in South Sudan, they received $1,200 million in remittances, a staggering 29.5% of GDP, compared with £104 million in UK aid. The World Bank says that in one recent year, $40 billion of remittances were sent to Sub-Saharan Africa. Money and goods from the diaspora are wonderfully targeted and relatively free from the problems of corruption and siphoning off by officials. Yet, as the Brookings Institute points out, and I quote, the fees paid to remittance service providers to send money to Africa average nearly 9%, the highest rate in the world, and 3 times the 3% Sustainable Development Goal target for remittance costs. So I hope the noble Lord the Minister, when he comes to reply, especially in the context of the diminished ODA, will address this and the high fees for digital remittance channels and commit to examining the Brookings proposals for a global non-profit remittance platform. But, my Lords, unless conflict in Africa, discussed in Chapter 6 of the report, and which looks at detail at countries like Nigeria, Somalia and Cameroon, which we've heard about from the noble Baroness and from the noble Lord, and if that is not addressed, then development will continue to be blighted. My Lords, as Baroness Annelly reminded us, the report names ideology as one of the factors driving conflict. Sudan's civil war, driven by Khartoum's attempts to impose its ideology, led to 2 million deaths. I saw ruined clinics, hospitals, schools and homes. Ultimately, Khartoum ideology destroyed their own country, partitioned it into 2 diminished states. I also visited Darfur. The same ideology killed 300,000 people and displaced 2 million, many of whom still live in precarious, squalid camps. Omar al-Bashir, indicted by the ICC for genocide and crimes against humanity, gave the orders in Darfur. Last week, Sudan's Foreign Minister, Miriam al-Mahdi, said that Bashir will be handed over to the ICC for trial. I'd like to hear from the Minister what progress is being made to expedite this. Across sub-Saharan Africa, mutations of the same ideology murder, maim, destroy and displace. Globally, a shocking 82.4 million people are forcibly displaced, with more than 26% of the world's refugee population in sub-Saharan Africa. And last year, the highest increase in the number of internally displaced people occurred in Africa. Displacement leads to trafficking, exploitation, and to jihadist recruitment, posing a real and present threat to local populations and to British interests, and indirectly to Britain itself. Jihadists in Boko Haram, IS West Africa and Al-Shabaab have inevitably seized on events in Afghanistan. Like the Taliban, their task is made so much easier by inherently weak and unpopular corrupt governments. Note that those who blindly support them also become tainted. According to the 2020 Global Terrorism Index, Nigeria is now ranked only behind Afghanistan and Iraq. Corruption and ineptitude have run the economy into the ground, while the UK has poured in over £2.5 billion over a decade, averaging £800,000 a day. Now, that doesn't imply support for cuts in ODA, but it's not unreasonable to ask, how are those resources being used to combat conflict? I've sent the Noble Lord, the Minister's Department, reports over the past 8 months of over 4,000 Christians who've been murdered by jihadists in Nigeria, 400 killed in August alone. Over 12 years, 43,000 Christians and 29,000 Muslims have been murdered by jihadists, with places of worship destroyed, attempts to eradicate alternative beliefs, and countless numbers of people displaced. The case of Leah Sharibu, the Christian girl abducted, raped and forcibly converted in 2018, is highlighted in the Select Committee report. She is still in captivity. What can the Minister tell us about Leah's case? A long-serving retired military intelligence officer states without equivocation that religion and ethnicity are primary factors in Nigeria's current insecurity. The foremost Muslim traditional ruler, the Sultan of Sokoto, has condemned the killings of others as un-Islamic and has called on the Nigerian government to decisively address the insecurity. The levels of insecurity in Nigeria are beyond critical, and the Buhari government's response is a mixture of complacency and complicity. My Lords, beyond ritual condemnations, what are we doing to hold those responsible to account? And let me end by turning, as the Noble Baroness Lady Hellick did, to the Horn of Africa and to Tigray, where conflict there, as in Nigeria, has morphed into atrocity crimes, including the use of man-made starvation, and where those responsible are living in impunity. Listen to this report from Monday's Daily Telegraph. It described how Tigrayans had, I quote, been rounded up, mutilated and dismembered, with thousands of men, women and children thrown into makeshift concentration camps, cutting off limbs and dumping mutilated bodies into mass graves as part of an orchestrated ethnic purge. What are we doing to bring those responsible to justice? The report says that the UK and its international partners have too often failed, I quote, to tackle the underlying conditions that allow conflict to emerge. It calls on the government to, quote, develop longer-term strategies to prevent conflict and, above all, to prevent genocide and support regional partners. I hope that the Minister will be able to tell us exactly how the government intends to do that and assure us that we will be less timid in confronting the destructive power of ideology and naming it for what it is.